Good afternoon, all. Oh, that works so well. I think you can hear me in the back, so I don't need to ask. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Kate Cagney, the director of the Institute for Social Research at the University of Michigan. I'm so glad you could participate in this conversation today. And this is, again, our ISR Insights Speaker Series. It's a forum for ISR faculty to share their research to inform the public good. And one of the reasons that I really so enjoy this series myself is that I get to understand at a greater level of depth the work of my colleagues. And so I know you will all appreciate that opportunity today. And just for those of you in the room not familiar with ISR, we have over 300 affiliated faculty who conduct research that addresses topics such as wealth and inequality, race and racism, politics and public opinion, as well as a wide range of other topics, including teen drug use, economic behavior, aging, and health. So a full schedule of Insights talks available on the ISR website, as well as recordings of past talks in this series, and we'll post a video today. So in case you want to share it with your friends, right? Yeah, that will be accessible to you. Today, I have the pleasure of introducing our speaker, Kira Birditt. She is a research professor in the Survey Research Center at ISR, and she leads the Aging and Biopsychosocial Innovations Research Group. Kira's research focuses on negative aspects of relationship stress and the implication of relationships and stress for health and well-being over time. She's interested in understanding how relationships differentially influence health and well-being depending on the context of that stress. Today, she'll share findings from an NIAAA-funded project that examined alcohol use and health among couples in the health and retirement study. And while recent research on couples has revealed that those with similar drinking behaviors tend to have better quality marriages, it's unclear whether these same patterns exist among older couples and whether they have implications for physical health as they grow older together. And I'll also say that, I had an opportunity to present with Kira. This was during the pandemic when do you remember this? we were on a Zoom, right, for a center at UT Austin. And I remember at that time, and actually I was, trying to decide if I wanted to come to the University of Michigan. And I remember really thinking, wow, I loved that presentation and what I learned from you. So you were influential in bringing me here during that pandemic period. So I'll close by saying we'll have time for Q&A at the end of the presentation. Please enjoy it. Now I'll turn things over to Kira. Help me in welcoming her.
Thank you for that wonderful introduction. And thank you for inviting me to speak today. I'll be talking about alcohol use among couples in the HRS, and it's an NIAAA funded R01 that we just completed. And I'll talk about 3 of the papers that came out of that project, looking at the implications for relationship quality, blood pressure, and mortality. As many of you probably already know, heavy alcohol use is one of the leading causes of mortality, disease, disability worldwide. And due to greater drinking among the baby boom generation, an alarming rise is expected in the number of older adults with alcohol-related problems. And it's particularly important to look at alcohol use among older adults because they tend to metabolize alcohol more slowly, and they're more likely to have chronic conditions and use more medication that might exacerbate the effects of alcohol. And just to give you an idea about the definitions of alcohol use in terms of what's moderate drinking versus heavy drinking, this is the NIAAA definition. And for men, it varies by age. Men less than age 65 can drink up to 14 drinks a week, and that's 2 drinks a day. You can't drink all of that in one day. So binge drinking is always bad. And heavy drinking for them is 15 or more drinks per week. So that's more than 2 drinks a day. If they're older than 65, they can only drink 7 drinks a week for moderate drinking or 8 drinks a week for heavy drinking. And women, it doesn't matter how old they are, unfortunately. It's always 7 drinks a week or less, or 8 drinks a week or more for heavy drinking. And we look at alcohol use in the context of marriage among older adults for several reasons. First of all, it's a very common context among older adults. 69% of adults over age 50 are married, and marriage provides an important context for understanding health behaviors. They share the same environments, they tend to share the same health behaviors and the same life stressors that might influence those behaviors. And couples are often similar across many health indicators, including things like depressive symptoms, sleep, physical activity, and alcohol use. And older couples are particularly interesting because they tend to spend more time together than younger couples due to things like retirement, their children leaving home, and disabilities that limit their activities. And when we look at alcohol use among couples, we often talk about what's called concordant drinking or discordant drinking. And concordant drinking is when they drink similar amounts. So that's if they both say they drink or they both say they don't drink. And then in terms of the level, if they're both heavy drinkers, is a concordant drinking couple. The discordant drinking couples drink dissimilar amounts. So you can have one person drinking none and the other person saying they drink as a type of discordance, or discordance in the level of drinking. And there's several theories of alcohol use in marriage that talk about the influence of alcohol, but it focuses mostly on young adults. And compatibility theory suggests that having similar health behaviors is related to greater marital satisfaction and longer marriages. And that's across all different types of health behaviors. And it's interesting that even smoking, if you both smoke, you're happier than if you don't. And so it's interesting that something can be unhealthy, but related to better marital quality. And based on those theories, researchers created what's called the drinking partnership theory, and that suggests that having similar levels of drinking is associated with better relationship quality and longer marriages. And the research on young adult couples has found, consistent with that theory, discordant drinking couples often report lower marital satisfaction, greater verbal aggression, and higher divorce rates compared to concordant drinking couples, and that's even heavy drinking couples. And the effects vary by gender. Heavy drinking among wives tend to be more detrimental for marriage, and discordance affects wives' opinions of their relationship more so than husbands. But all of this research focuses on young adults, and we were really interested in whether these patterns of drinking have implications for physical health as people grow older and the effects of alcohol may become more detrimental. So to understand implications for health among couples, we developed what we call the dyadic biopsychosocial model of alcohol use and cardiovascular health in marriage. And it suggests that both the wife's alcohol use affects her own health and her views of the relationship, and the husband's alcohol use affects his own health and his views of the relationship. But then there's also partner effects. So they're both affecting each other's health and views of relationships in terms of their alcohol use. And in the marriage literature, we often talk about this being actor effects versus partner effects. So it's the individual within person associations and the couple associations. And for all of these, we used a health and retirement study, and I'm not going to go into detail. I'm sure you all know about it. It's a longitudinal study of people over age 50 in the US, and it's conducted every 2 years. And we use different parts of the health and retirement study to answer our questions because the measures vary. So I'll get into that as I go through. First, we'll talk about the implications of alcohol use and marital tension. Second, the implications for blood pressure. And then lastly, we'll talk about whether it affects how long they live. So the measures of alcohol use in the HRS include 3 questions, and we make 2 constructs with those questions. First, there's a question about ever drinking. So it's, do you ever drink any alcoholic beverages such as beer, wine, or liquor? And that's our ever drinking or drinking status variable. So that can be just drinking any alcohol. And then we look at 2 other items to look at in terms of how much are they drinking. In the last 3 months on average, how many days per week have you had any alcohol to drink? And on the days that you do drink, how many drinks do you have? And we create an average drinks per week variable, taking the number of days a week by the number of drinks to create an average drinks per week. So this is just to give you an idea of how much drinking there is in the HRS, and it's across the 3 studies that I'll talk about. On average, 62% of the husbands and 52% of the wives reported ever drinking, so that's their drinking status. And then in terms of average drinks per week, husbands consumed 3.5 drinks per week and wives consumed 1.7 drinks per week. And this looks a little low because we included the non-drinkers. And this is because we need to know if they're concordant or discordant in their marriages. If we only looked at average drinks per week with only the non-drinkers, we wouldn't see those findings. So when you look at it with just drinkers, it's around 6 drinks for men and 3 drinks for women a week. And so here is a description of the concordance and discordance just in drinking status across the studies that we conducted, and it's similar across. But on average, the most common drinking pattern in older couples is that they both drink. So this is just that ever drinking variable. That's the purple part of the pie. And then the second most common is saying that they don't drink at all. So that's concordant drink. So we call them concordant drinkers and concordant non-drinkers. So first we looked at whether alcohol use has implications for marital tension. And we focused on marital tension in particular, which includes things like feeling too many demands on you, feeling irritated with your spouse, feeling let down when you expect to rely on them. And we focused on negative aspects of the marital tie because it tends to be more highly associated with health than the positive aspects of relationships. And they're actually not that highly correlated. Just because you feel negative about somebody doesn't necessarily mean you feel less positive. The spousal tie is often the most ambivalent relationship. They're very irritating and you also love them a great deal. And older adults tend to be particularly sensitive to the negative aspects of relationships, showing higher associations between marital tension and well-being as they age. So this is just to give you an overview of the demographics of the first paper. And it varies by paper in terms of what data we included. And this is because in 2006, the HRS included the enhanced face-to-face portion of this study where they went to people's homes and did all the biomeasures, and then they left a leave behind questionnaire that asked them about their marital quality as well as a ton of other variables. And so this study included, and then it's conducted with 50% of the sample every 2 years. So they could do 2006 and 2010 to be longitudinal, or 2008 and 2012 to be longitudinal, and we combine those. So to look at marital tension, there's 4 questions in the survey. It includes how often does your spouse make too many demands, criticize you, let you down, or get on your nerves? And higher scores mean more marital tension. And the level of tension is pretty low. In the HRS, husbands had 1.86 and wives had 1.96 in terms of their level of tension. And as is shown in all of the research, women always have more marital tension than men. So first we looked at whether the drinking status was associated with marital tension in terms of just without looking at gender. And we found that concordant drinking couples reported lower levels of marital tension compared to the discordant couples. And this is consistent with the research on young adult marriages, showing that concordance tends to be more highly associated with lower marital conflict and tension. And next we looked at whether marital tension varied as a function of gender and the drinking status variable. And we found only wives were affected by the level of concordance versus discordance in the relationship in terms of alcohol use. The concordant drinking wives reported lower marital tension than the discordant wife drinker and husband non-drinking couples. So, and husbands showed no effect of concordance or discordance on their marital quality. So overall, this paper showed that consistent with the drinking partnership and the dyadic biopsychosocial theory, concordant drinking couples report the least amount of tension. And women in concordant drinking couples reported lower tension than those in the discordant wife drinking and husband non-drinking couples, which is kind of an interesting pattern, but it's also similar to the young adult research, which is interesting. We don't know why there are these gender differences, but we have some speculation. One might be that women are more in tune with discordance and concordance in their relationships because they're taught to be more concerned about relationships. They're often referred to as a barometer of the marital tie in terms of being able to decide, is it a good relationship or not? But it also could be a reaction to deviation from social or cultural norms if the wife is drinking and the husband isn't, because husbands tend to drink more than wives. And so it might be an uncomfortable feeling. So next we wanted to know, if concordance is so great for your marriage, does it impact your blood pressure, especially among older people who tend to have higher blood pressure and might be particularly at risk when they use alcohol? There's a great deal of research on alcohol use and blood pressure, and there's a lot of disagreement about whether it's good at all to drink. And there's been a ton of media about it lately. This is not up-to-date literature, but it has often been shown that low to moderate alcohol use might have cardioprotective effects, but it could be, it might not be true, and I'll explain a little bit with the mortality paper. The heavy alcohol use, without a doubt, is always bad. It's associated with increased risk of coronary heart disease, higher blood pressure, and stroke. And there's greater evidence of the effects of alcohol on blood pressure among men compared to women. And we wondered about the health implications of this in couples. So is concordant drinking associated with worse blood pressure? And this is, the sample is a little bit different because they had to do the blood pressure measurement in their houses. And we did have, this is a later paper, so we could include another wave. So they had to do 2 to 3 waves in this paper from 2006 to 2016, depending on which cohort they were in. And the blood pressure was assessed with a cuff, and we focused on systolic blood pressure. And just to give you a context, levels of 130 or more is considered hypertensive. And because so many people are on blood pressure medicine, we adjusted for taking blood pressure medicine by adding 10 to those scores. First, we looked at whether there was an association between average drinks per week and blood pressure without considering the couple. And we found that husbands and wives who drank more alcohol had higher blood pressure. So that was consistent with all the research on alcohol and blood pressure. But what was interesting is that the association between husband's drinking and his own blood pressure varied by the wife's level of drinking. Husbands who drank more alcohol had higher blood pressure when wives also drank more alcohol. So this shows that perhaps drinking concordance is bad for men's blood pressure. Whereas the husbands who drank more alcohol and had wives who drank less than 1 drink per week showed no association between their drinking and their blood pressure. So it's really fascinating that within a marriage that the impact of an individual's health behaviors might vary by their spouse's use. So greater drinking is associated with greater blood pressure, and husbands who drank more had higher blood pressure when wives drank more alcohol. And so it could be that concordance can be bad for you if it's in the level of drinking, because before we looked at just the ever drink variable. And now if you look at average drinks per week, maybe it's not so good if you're both drinking too much. And husbands, we don't know why this is the case, but we've done other research with the HRS data and found that wives who report greater stress, their husbands tend to have higher blood pressure, but there's no effect on wives. And so it could be that this is a stress response, that maybe women are using more alcohol because they're stressed and men are feeling that stress. We don't have mechanism data about this. And wives are usually a source of primary source of support for husbands, and so they rely on them more, and also a source of social control. So wives are more likely to tell their husbands what to do in terms of health behaviors, and it could be that wives aren't doing that if they're also drinking just as much. So finally, we wanted to know, do these drinking patterns affect how long people actually live in the HRS? And what's interesting about this, as other ones too, but the research always looks at the individual's level of drinking and impact on mortality. And moderate alcohol use is often associated with lower mortality, whereas heavy alcohol use is associated with higher rates of mortality. But there's a lot of debate in the literature, because if you include people who don't drink, they might not drink because they're unhealthy. So it's called the sick quitter hypothesis, which might account for all of the benefits that are shown with moderate drinking. So we've been careful to control for chronic illness in this study, because we needed to include all the non-drinkers to find the discordance and concordance. This study included a lot more couples because we could include the core interview. We didn't focus on the psychosocial leave behind questionnaire. So participants had to do 3 waves between 1996 and 2016. And we looked at mortality in 2016. And so each person received a score of 1 if they were deceased, or a 0 if they survived. And then we looked at the average number of years in the study, which was 17, and a total of 42% had died by 2016. And so you give a score to the people who survived, and the people who survived got a survival rate of 21 years. So this will help you look at the graphs next. This is the association between drinking status in terms of concordance and discordance on survival. And couples who both drank had better survival than all of the other couples. And everybody just dies about this. They're like, it's actually good for you to drink, but it's not really true because it's just ever drinking. It's not. And they survive longer. The one that's the worst off is when the person is a non-drinker and their partner drinks, which is interesting. Next, we looked at whether the average drinks per week were associated with mortality. And this is before looking at the couple patterns. So we wanted to know within a person, their level of drinking, does that impact their own survival? And then does their spouse's level of drinking impact their survival? And what was really interesting about this is we found that heavy drinkers had higher mortality rates, which is consistent with all of the research. And we also found that when partners drank light to moderate amounts, individuals had lower mortality rates. And we found that when partners drank too much, individuals had higher mortality rates. So there's way more partner effects in this finding than there are individual effects, showing that the importance of the marital tie for mortality. Next, we looked at whether there was an interaction to see if the couple patterns of average drinks per week were associated with mortality, and we did find an interaction, but only for women. And the finding suggests that drinking concordance in average drinks per week is associated with better survival among women, but only if it's light to moderate drinking. So on the left-hand side is showing just when the husband drinks very little, so 0 doesn't mean non-drinking, but it could be just occasional drinking. The wives who survive the longest are the ones who have 1 drink a week, so they're kind of matching in their low levels. And then the husbands who had 2 to 10 drinks per week, their wives survived longer if they had 1 drink a week or 2 to 7 drinks per week. That's the kind of green and gold lines. So that's showing that when they had concordance in their moderate levels, the wives survived longer. So overall, this shows that concordant drinking spouses survive longer, but that's in terms of the status. We don't know why concordance is related to better survival rates, but it could just reflect more compatibility in those spousal relationships in terms of their lifestyle, their intimacy. They might engage in more social activities together, for instance. And the previous research that we've conducted with other data sets, we found that concordant drinking spouses are more likely to drink with each other than they are with other people. And so maybe it's fostering intimacy. And the previous research on young couples have found that when couples drink together, they tend to report greater intimacy and better relationship quality compared to drinking with others. And light drinking predicted better survival rates among individuals and their partners. And so this shows that partners drinking influences survival rates in patterns that are consistent with the research on individuals. But we don't know why this is either. So we have so much more to do in this area. So why is it that partners who drink less are improving the survival of their spouses? And then wives appear to benefit more from drinking concordance. And this might be consistent with the marital tension paper, that perhaps wives are more concerned with whether they have similarity or dissimilarity in their drinking patterns. So this is the first time I've talked about all these papers together, and it blew up my brain because I've never thought about how they make sense together. And I was trying to think of overall take-home messages, but we'll see. And this is all Anna's fault. Thank you, Anna, because she invited me to give the talk. So the effects of drinking on marital quality and health, this basically varies by marital context and gender. That's one big take home. And couples are most likely to be concordant drinkers. And concordance in any drinking, it looks like it's pretty positive. It predicts lower marital tension and a longer lifespan. But wives appear to benefit more from drinking concordance, more so than husbands, who might show negative blood pressure effects. So it's really important not to be drinking too much, just maybe a little. But it's unclear what the mechanisms are. For instance, is it shared leisure activities? Is it compatibility? Is it social control? So we have a lot of future directions to pursue. In our other research areas, we do a lot of research on daily experiences and EMAs, and I think that's the next step in this research on older couples, because if you could find out when are they drinking, who are they drinking with, why are they drinking with their spouse, I think that would really help understand some of these findings in terms of the mechanisms. We have another paper we're working on to look at additional biomeasures of health in the HRS. So are the findings consistent when you look at C-reactive protein, for instance, or waist circumference is another area that we're looking into. And finally, I think the use of alcohol for coping is an interesting area, especially under highly stressed populations. And we have a lot of research we're doing on caregivers. And I think it'd be really interesting to look at alcohol use among caregivers and the implications for caregiver burden and health. And I'd like to acknowledge the funding is from NIAAA, and of course the health and retirement study. We could not have done this without them. And my team on the NIAAA grant, and my team members on my ABI who I've been torturing for years now. Thank you. So are we supposed to take questions?
Yes.
Okay.
Do you want us all to line up? Do we have a mic? You know, I was so struck by in some sense, you know, so what's surprising finding health abuse. It's reminding me of some work from the National Social Life Health Movement Project, which seemed to suggest that, you know, of course we know there would be potentially a health effect if you can drink, right? That is prohibited from drinking, but also that it's a signal of sociability, right? That they're oriented toward the outside, that they're likely drinking, like I can point out, the couples drink together, but they might be drinking in a larger social context in which, right, that has its own independent health effects and effects on emotional well-being. So I just wanted to comment on that.
Yes, I mean, I think that's an interesting idea. I think that if you do a negative health behavior with a person that you like, I think it can be associated with an improvement in your level of stress, but it's also killing you if you did it too much. So I think it's really interesting.
So there's some, right, there's some threshold between happiness and death.
Right. I mean, I think we could do some stuff with the HRS maybe that we haven't done yet in terms of are those couples more socially integrated, for instance, with the psychosocial.
Right.
Yeah. Thank you. That's important.
Are you telling me that I have to take up drinking?
Yeah.
Maybe just do something fun that's relaxing. With your spouse.
I could pretend to drink.
Yeah, I think that other thing I keep thinking about is marijuana might be another area of research on this. So if you have a concordance in your marijuana, you're happier. Yeah. I think it's just about being similar with your spouse and something that you both enjoy.
Pickleball.
Yeah, something like that. Oh, Sarah's
Sorry.
here.
Oh, yeah, I wasn't here. Thank you for your presentation. I was kind of curious, this is about your future work, so I don't want to, kind of in forward thinking. I would wonder with caregiving, if you'd also find kind of something with the discordance and concordance, because like if the person is in really ill health, they continue to drink, right? So not just with the caregiver burden, but because of that discordance. Is that kind of how you're seeing it, or would you be looking at just the caregivers drinking?
I hadn't thought that far ahead.
Okay.
That's really interesting, because I guess it would depend on who you're caring for.
Right, yeah, and I'm thinking, you know, because like in the context of dementia, for instance, like if that person kept drinking because that's what they were used to, that cause more stress? Because dementia is a pretty progressive, difficult disease, right? And kind of similar things like chronic heart failure, but I was thinking about in relation to your blood pressure, like heart disease, like, you know, if the person continues to drink, that would make a difference. Anyway, so that's in the future.
Yeah, I think it would be interesting to look at that longitudinally too. So if you go from concordant drinking and then because you get an illness or dementia, you become discordant, I think that's would be another way of testing this, like you're saying, that does a relationship disintegrate or get worse?
Okay, this is a non-researcher, just speculative question.
Great.
Is an older woman question. Is it possible that the reason why he has high blood pressure when they're both drinking is that he realizes she's not going to drive him home? Actually, just the real question is, what would you do to figure out why he has high blood pressure?
Ask how long. You made me think about many things at the same time. I practiced this presentation with my husband, and he loves the finding about why it's affecting men's blood pressure. Every time I find it, he's like, "See, you're killing me." I think maybe doing laboratory research or daily diary research, I think would get at that. Like, so when your wife, when they both report drinking, does it predict husband stress on the next day? And then you can kind of get at what might maybe the mechanisms. Maybe she's off drinking with her buddies and not hanging out with him anymore.
Right.
Or, you know, it could be lots of different things.
Hi, super interesting talk. I was curious if, just descriptively, if patterns of discordant relationships were common among couples with different levels of education. I'm just trying to fit this into everything I know about like the sort of baby literature.
I haven't looked at that, but that would be really interesting. So there might be other factors, of course, there are other factors that are accounting for the findings. Yeah, because the research shows that higher income people drink more and higher education, yeah. So, you know, and we don't know, like, did they start out discordant or did they become discordant?
I had a question. Because this is focusing on heteronormative couples, I was curious about LGBTQ couples, especially with the gender component. Is that if you have a couple with two women or with two men or non-binary or trans folks, I'm just wondering if you had encountered that in your research or if that's an area that you're looking into or just how the LGBTQ community factors into all that.
So we haven't looked at it in HRS because it's so few people, it's only like 4% of the couples. We did include, I'm sorry I didn't mention this, there are cohabiting couples in this, they're not necessarily married, but that's also very small. I think 97% of the people are married. The research on sexual minorities, I think, does find different effects of drinking, but I can't remember what they are, and I think it's a really interesting area of research that we should be pursuing, and we talk about it in every discussion section because it's so unfortunate that we can't test whether is it about gender or is it about something else. Thank you.
I also wondered, because I think it was 17 years of data, I wondered if you could tease apart, you might not have enough, but like cohort effects, because you kind of mentioned how, right, it's not as normative for women, but like young women are like been drinking more than young men nowadays, so like as it becomes more normative for women, do you think that will change?
I think it will definitely change as the baby boomers get older too. And I haven't looked at cohort yet, but that's an interesting idea.
Hi, I'm wondering how you're thinking about possible bias in people's reporting their own alcohol use, especially if that's something that's a gender effect, which might be conversation.
It's complicated. I always think that people don't say, this is just my personal thought, is that they will just decrease the amount in their reports, but they won't say they don't drink at all. But I think that they just kind of lie about the amount. So we're getting at the level, but not necessarily the actual one. I don't know. But yeah, you never know with people in line. And it'd be really, what would be super fun is if we could put those alcohol sensor things on people and do that daily study. Then we know. But yeah, it's a really good kind of point. Well, thank you, really quick. Yes?
I'm just gonna shout. I wanted to ask just another, social network question. What's the network data look like in HRS? Do you have a good sense of, you have a household roster, right? But you don't have.
We have relationship quality with,
Uh-huh.
but it's like children and spouse and other family. And then, you get like a social integration network, but there's no list of like who they feel close to.
Okay, you don't have that in that kind of conventional network roster. Yeah. I was just trying to think about, ways to get at this embeddedness question. And how socially integrated people are, I guess, apart from that summary question, which I guess is, what is the social integration question?
It's, do you belong to social clubs? How many children do you have? How much contact do you have with people? And you put it all together. So you're thinking like if you're in a network where everybody's using alcohol, or have a.
Sure, yeah, and I go back to the example I raised earlier. Ed Lauman has all these theories about, people who, University of Chicago, shout out, that, people who also have like a little extra weight are happier and healthier too. And his theory is that they're eating and drinking, right? They're out with people, they're enjoying themselves, and that's a way, that's an indicator, right, of that enjoyment.
Yeah.
So right, just really trying to think about that there might be something to the embeddedness that leads people to engage. That's it.
Yeah, I think so. It's all about social relationships, because that's my favorite topic too.
Any other questions? Great, well, thank you so much for that. Was great.
It was